So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm your host, Jordan Youkilis, one of the founding partners of Key Investment Partners. And today I am very excited to be joined by author, public speaker, and psychedelics advocate, Peggy Van De Plassche.
Hi, Jordan. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks, Peggy. Really excited to have you joining the podcast today.
We're very excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I think it would be great if you could start by giving a little bit of your background and how you ended up in your current part of your career as spending more time writing and public speaking relative to coming from more of the finance background.
Yes, and thank you again for having me. So, as you mentioned, my background is in finance. I spent 20 years in the financial services industry, and the last 7 years, I had my own business and I was advising investment funds for technology investments. So think of me as a venture capitalist. After 20 years in finance, which I enjoyed very much, I decided to change my career and focus mainly on mental health and personal transformation and psychedelics. And I'm sure we'll go in more details with my own experience in psychedelics, but that's really, that was one of the elements that made me change my career, actually.
Yeah, well, definitely excited to get more in the weeds about what that transformation was like. With regards to your financial services career, how did that progress? What firms were you with?
Well, actually, I work with large banks. I advise large pension funds. So I'm sure you can hear I'm from France originally, but I've been in Canada for 20 years. So I work for two very large banks here. I also work for a very large tech company. I managed a family office for a wealthy tech entrepreneur. And then I went full on in the venture capital, really focusing on the fintech investment. So technology for financial services. That was really my sweet spot.
Gotcha. And so are you still involved in any third-party asset management, or have you completely exited the financial sector?
Well, I slowly exited, so I still have a couple of retainers. I'm still on a couple of boards, but I'm slowly getting out. It's not always easy to flip the switch overnight. So I'm doing that. I'm doing that incrementally, actually.
Gotcha. Very, very interesting. And so now thinking through the transformation in your life that took place, I'm curious, was there a specific driver of that transformation?
Well, actually, I started my transformation journey 10, 12 years ago. And actually, at that time, I was managing a family office. And I would say the driver of the journey was very much the gentleman I was managing the money from. He was actually a very, very unpleasant individual, but he taught me many things, and he showed me a life and a lifestyle that I never envisioned. I'm coming from low-income family. Yes, you can watch on TV what great wealth means, but when you're really working with someone like that, you're like, oh my God, that's what it means. I'm just jumping in my private jet because I just want to, and I'm going to spend 2 weeks in the south of France because I decided to do that. I was just like, oh my God, that's an interesting life. And it's very interesting. It really opened up my mind to possibilities, which wasn't the case before, but also to all the limiting belief I had on myself. And I realized that, okay, what got me here won't get me there. And that's how I started spending a lot of times on really changing the way I see things, changing my belief. And that's when I realized that actually I had a lot of mental health challenges, which I didn't even know I had. So I spent a lot of time and, resources, energy, healing myself. And I would say 9 months ago, I was really getting frustrated because I thought it was not going fast enough, and big enough. I mean, after 12 years, you're like, okay, I thought that by now, things would be sorted. And at the same time, I was bombarded by information on psychedelics and especially psilocybin, so magic mushroom. And that's when I decided to start microdosing. Being in Canada, this is extremely easy to access. Actually, psilocybin, I buy it at my massage therapist off the shelf. So that is indeed very easy. And
That's great.
yeah, it's it's a different, and I'm sure you're going to see that in Colorado very soon. Actually, in British Columbia, they have literally shops, where you can go and buy the mushrooms, like in Amsterdam. So I started microdosing, and it really gave me that shift that I really wanted to see, especially from a negative mindset to a more positive, options-oriented, possibilities approach mindset. So that was extremely valuable for me. So I decided to share my stories. And because it worked so well, I was like, well, let's double down. So I went on 2 big trips with guides where you take, this time not microdose but macrodose, and that has been also extremely valuable. So psychedelics have played a great role for me in my own transformation, and now I'm integrating that in my career, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. And so a couple questions come to mind immediately. One of them is, how did you figure out what type of microdosing plan that you wanted to follow? Was there a book or a resource that you recommend?
Yeah, well, I did a lot of research, we all go Google right away, So, and there are so many documentaries now, on Netflix, obviously. There was all the documentary with Michael Pollan and his book and all of that. So I read a lot. I never took recreational drugs before. So, I was very cautious, let's put it that way. But, I just, after reading multiple blog posts and books and all that great stuff, I was pretty confident, and I just started, and then I adjusted the frequency, the dosage, based on what was good for me at the time. I still adjust the frequency and the dosage because, we're never twice the same person. So something that was working for me 6 months ago might not be optimal now. I think that's very important for people to realize that, because people always, people ask me very often about my regimen. But, I'm a 45-year-old woman. If you're a 22-year-old man, maybe that's not the same regimen that would be good for you. And again, based on what's happening in your life, you might change. So I think it's always important to use the baseline and then test what works for you. I also tried several types of mushrooms because they don't all have the same benefits. So I wanted to see which was the best for me. So a lot of trial, basically.
Yeah. And I think, what you bring up about dosage is a really important part of psychedelics in particular, and I think just pharmacology more broadly, that often just gets lost in the shuffle, right? Where people, based on the designation 50 years ago that was made as what was legal and illegal, that's how people define what's a drug versus medicine, where really the conversation needs to be much more around dosage and potency.
Absolutely. And, you're bang on. It's very interesting to look at what was appropriate, even, in the workplace. Think about it. What was tolerated and appropriate 15, 20 years ago, which now would absolutely not be appropriate or tolerated. Thank God. And there is still, hopefully in 20 years, there's still way more, but, will not be tolerated and accepted. And it's the same thing. The world is changing. So this idea, I have girlfriends who've been on the same anti-anxiety medication for 20 years. I'm like, 20 years taking the same medication? I don't know. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me. And that's something I want to say as well regarding psilocybin and psychedelics in general, is that they rewire your brain. So when you look at drugs that are approved today and that are supposed to be safe, the only thing they do for depression, anxiety, this type of mental health challenges, they just solve the symptoms. So it's just a band-aid. Well, psilocybin is actually rewiring your brain, so curing technically the problem. And that's something we don't talk enough about because it's a massive difference.
Right. Well, and I would also add that a lot of those other existing medications, not only do they only treat the symptoms, they also cause all kinds of other side effects that are really unpleasant as well.
Exactly. And, it's interesting to see how the Western medicine looks at us as if we're a car. Okay, let me just change the tires. Yeah, but you know what? This might have an impact on other pieces of my car. So if you're telling me, to your point, let's take that anti-anxiety medication to stay on that with that example. Yeah, but what is it doing to my stomach? What is it doing to my blood pressure? What is it doing to the rest of my body? To your point, that is not necessarily taken into consideration. So it is not safe, and it's definitely not safer than psilocybin.
Right. I totally agree. And I think, if you look at, and I'll see if I can find the chart for the notes for this discussion. But anyway, it's there's a great chart that shows on one axis the lethal dosage, or the harmful dosage, and how dangerous it is, as well as the potential for addictiveness. And if you look at it, psychedelics are both in the lowest risk category there. So it's really interesting versus, other substances that are either fully legal, like alcohol, or the same, Schedule 1 substance like heroin are clearly far more dangerous, but yet we tend to just lump them all together in the same drug category.
Well, I want to say two things to that. The first is my dosage for psilocybin has actually decreased over time because I don't need as much. So it's the opposite of the addiction. The second, it's the frame of mind. We all know alcohol, or tobacco for that matters, extremely, extremely bad for health. But because at the time when it was, 100 years, 200 years ago, when it was sold, well, people didn't know, they didn't care. And so we didn't really come back to that. Imagine alcohol being discovered today. That wouldn't be something you could buy just because you're 90 years old or whatever, 21 in the US, but I think 19 here. And that's the thing that, again, we always tend to attach ourselves to what was done in the past, back to what you were saying with the regulation for psilocybin. But if we were starting today, you would see very different decisions being made for the drugs, for the alcohol, for the tobacco. You're an investor, I'm an investor. I'm always very interested by how much regulators are overseeing investments made by retail or retail investor, non-accredited investor. But you can spend thousands of dollars on lottery tickets. I'm just like, okay, what does it come that on one end, if I invest more than $500 in a startup, you're regulating that. But if I spend $5,000 on lottery tickets, that's not an issue. It doesn't make any sense. So we need to be very careful and always ask questions. It might be the rules, it might be the law, but is it right? Does it make sense?
Right. Totally. I think, the harsh reality is a lot of the pharmaceutical industry has been built around what is going to maximize profits and keep customers paying top dollars for our medicines, not what's actually going to help people get healthy.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is, why you don't want to treat the cause, but you're happy to treat the symptoms? Well, you're going to be a forever client. Well, if I solve your problem, well, obviously the lifetime value of the consumer is not as important. If I look again at how much my psilocybin costs, it's nothing because I take such small doses and it's so cheap. I mean, I'm not even sure it costs me the price of a bottle of wine per month. It costs nothing.
Yep. Now, on that note, do you have any concerns that as more of these clinical trials proceed through the FDA and the like, that the pharmaceutical companies will look to patent and monopolize the use of psychedelics going forward?
Yeah. So it's been interesting if you look at the patents that have been filed recently. It's like crazy. So you can see, for example, therapies that are augmented with psychedelics, where basically what is patented is the color of the walls of the rooms where the medication is given. I mean, like, you see things that don't make it's just insane. So I agree with you. I mean, I hear where your question was going. We're going to see a lot of abuse because people want to capitalize on it. And that's a bit the challenge when you have a pool of money that is becoming available, is that, well, everyone wants its cut. So people who might have been maybe believers 5-10 years ago and who have really helped at changing the regulations and, making the psychedelics renaissance as we know it, they're going to be replaced by people who are purely motivated by financial gains. And I'm not saying it is mutually exclusive. I mean, you can make money while still doing good. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But at the same time, you might have costs and price of products going up just because now, instead of being my little chocolate with mushroom I buy at my massage therapist, it's going to be FDA approved. People is going to feel more comfortable with that, and it's going to cost them 100 times more. So I think you're going to see that type of things there, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So now that you have left the financial world, what types of activities are keeping you busy?
So I wrote a book actually on my experience with microdosing. So right now I'm looking for an agent. Finding an agent is really like finding your spouse. You need someone who's really like-minded, you want someone to fall in love with your story. So I'm spending time looking for an agent. I've been producing a lot of content on, this intersection between mental health, psychedelics, and transformations, because I think there is a story there. We were talking a bit earlier about the corporate changing in the last 20 years. I think there's a lot of things I hope the corporate world will change. So I'm trying to be a bit more vocal for that, because I think a lot of the mental health issue we see are linked with bullying in the workplace and this type of not so kind behavior. So I'm trying to be a voice for that. And I'm doing public speaking. I've always done public speaking. Before I was talking about fintech and technology investment and venture capital. Now I'm talking about psychedelics, personal transformation, and mental health. But obviously what I've learned before is helping me today. But it seems like very, very different type of conversation.
Yeah, totally. Has that been an easy transition for you to make?
Yes and no. I would say yes, because as much as I loved what I was doing in the finance world, I didn't really recognize myself anymore in that. That's, I would say, the challenge with healing, is that you realize maybe choices you've made in the past were based on some limiting belief you might have had. And when you get rid of this limiting belief, you're like, well, maybe that's not the choice I would have made, in a different situation. So I was kind of shedding my identity that is linked to finance. And I would say, is it complicated? It's not so much that it's complicated, it's that it's a new world. It's a new industry. If I look at publishing the book, it's not an industry I'm familiar with, so I need to relearn everything. So it's exciting, but at the same time, well, it's not my comfort zone anymore.
Yeah, That makes sense. And you mentioned how before you first tried microdosing, you'd never been a recreational drug user. Were you concerned about using psychedelics? Like, what fears or maybe stigmas did you have before attempting them?
Yeah, well, you know what? I think the fact that these were extremely small dosage and that I did a lot of research, I was not that worried, to be honest with you, because I have read enough to know at the
Sure.
dosage I was taking, there was no, it was very unlikely that anything would happen. But when I did the macro dosing, meaning taking a full dose of psychedelics, I was a bit more nervous, let's put it that way. But I did it with two guides that were very, very well versed. We've been guiding journeys for a decade or something like that. So I was quite comfortable. I would not have done that, in my basement in front of my TV. That's not who I am. So I tend to do my research to minimize any type of risks. And the journeys I've done have been extremely helpful, again, in terms of healing traumas and things like that. That has been extremely, it's very difficult to describe, but I would recommend it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I think, specifically for the macro dose experiences, they're, believed to be ineffable. So obviously inherently very challenging to describe, but with that in mind, is there any details you can remember that were particularly profound from any of those more macro experiences?
For sure. And there is one thing I want to mention before going there, whether it's for micro or macro dosing, and actually it's for everything in our life, but the intention. What are we trying to achieve with that? And when I started microdosing, or when I went on my macro dosing journey, my intentions were crystal clear. So it wasn't like, okay, well, let's try it, like a tourist. So that's also probably why I've seen such great results, because I knew what I wanted to get out of it. So when I went to do my journey, so there was 2 trips. So first trip, 1 day of recuperation, another trip. For me, the first day, my intention was to let go of past trauma. As I mentioned, I'm 45. So as you can imagine, past trauma, you're like, okay, which one's going to show up? You don't know, because we all, we all have at our age, like more things that have filled up, So it was very interesting, because two things popped up. One was I lost my brother when I was a teenager in an accident. He was a bit older than I. So that is something that, I'm not coming from a culture that is using therapy or things like that. So when something traumatic happened, you just push it deep down and you never look again, like you close the box. So I never dealt with that. So that definitely came up very, very strongly, as you can imagine. And the second was very much around the self-loathing, the self-hatred, that I've been experiencing for very, very forever, I guess. And these are the 2 big pieces that I really let go, or at least let go at the level of consciousness I was at when I did the journey. I'm sure if I do another journey in 5 years, that might come back and I might have to let go at a higher level. You know what I mean? So that was my first journey, my first intention. I also had during that journey, amazing space travels, big revelations, like it lasted 7 hours. So, like it's a lot of loops. And the second journey was really, my intention was really to amplify the good. So it was a way milder journey, because the first one was extremely emotional and extremely physical, like very, very challenging. The second journey was more pleasant, definitely pleasant in the type of things maybe you imagine when you're going in a journey. But the fact that I was guided by two amazing professionals make all the difference, like, again, I would not recommend people to do that on their own. Absolutely not. Or not even with a friend, even if they have someone who's just sitting next to them to make sure they don't do anything silly. You don't get the benefit of the plant medicine. You need professional really to guide you. At least that's my experience.
Sure. Well, thank you, Peggy. And if there are folks who still, are maybe skeptical or nervous about considering psychedelics, is there anything you recommend for them, or maybe a good starting resource, something like that?
Yes, well, actually, I wrote a few articles on my experience, my regimen, and all of that. So you can link to that, and people can always send me a note.
Great.
Every time I speak, I have many people reaching out to me to ask me specific questions. Especially, there's still a bit of stigma, let's be honest, associated with psychedelics. So people don't really like to speak up on social media or during in front of a crowd. So if they're more comfortable sending me a message, a DM, they can feel free to do so. Well, I can just tell you what I wish I have done, and I wish I would have done that 10 years ago. So I think that's the best thing I can tell to anyone. There's so much value, whether it is in the mental health, anxiety, depression, stress, PTSD, all of that. You'll see benefits in terms of performance and focus. I wrote a book in 10 days, so that gives you an idea. And the third bucket is really in terms of awareness. You're going to get so much coming from that experience, even the microdosing, in terms of intuition and in terms of, your life is taking this high definition type of shine. And you know what, life is too short to not have this high definition option, like why not give it all, you know what I mean? So again, for me, it has been amazing. So I've been speaking a lot about that. I do understand that some people are still reluctant, and you know what, maybe they're reluctant now, and in 6 months they're comfortable, or in 1 year they're comfortable. So that's all that matters, like you need to follow your own rhythm.
Totally. Beautifully said, Peggy. And thank you again for coming on and talking about your experience, helping to destigmatize and open up the conversation so that people can hear directly about, what these medicines can do.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jordan, for giving me an opportunity to explain my experience, and hopefully it would have answered some questions for your listeners.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
Awesome. I can't hear you again, but great job.
Yeah, thank you.
Stop this.